Hi, I am Tony Russo from On Deathcare, where we discuss the shifting trends and the business, science, and culture of death care, one conversation at a time. I am so excited to start off this new interview series with Professor Tanya Marsh of Wake Forest Law. She is an expert in funeral service law and cemetery law, and she's someone from whom we will hear with some regularity in the coming year. But this time, we are talking about the recently released Consumer Preference for Disposition study. These are the findings of a study that Tanya and her students did at Wake Forest for the Cremation Association of North America, CANA. She, that is Tanya, just recently spoke at the CANA Symposium, where it was really well received. And we're going to talk a lot about it, but I really want to direct you to the show notes and to the link, because this is a report that you should look at and download for yourself and pick it apart for yourself, because all the businesses are different, but these are trends that you should know about. And I really want you to pay attention to the paradox part of it, because one of the things, I think the major takeaway from this, one of the major takeaways, is this kind of dog that didn't bark approach. There are things that people are saying that they can't mean given the other things that they've said. And Tanya will take us through that, but you really should take a look for yourself and see what other nuggets are in there that can prove useful to the way that you're planning on your approach to dispositions over the coming decade. This is a report that comes out every year, so hopefully it's a conversation we get to have every year. And I don't want to even keep you from it, so please stay on till the end, because I've got some more to say, but I don't want to keep you from the conversation. Here's my chat with Tanya Marsh. You're recently back from the CANA convention in Las Vegas, where you presented your findings. And how was the reception there?
It was great. It was the CANA Symposium.
Sorry.
It was well received. I had a lot of folks come up to me after the presentation and the next day and ask me follow-up questions. I mean, I think responsible people in the industry want to know what consumers want, and they want to have a finger on the pulse, right? And try and take into account changing trends. I think, CANA is an interesting organization because of the focus on cremation, but I think the death care industry in general sort of got caught flat-footed by the move to cremation that started 50 years ago. The CANA group is not the group that got caught flat-footed, right? So, I mean, they're more adaptive probably than the norm, but they don't want to be caught if another wave is coming, right? Whether it's moving towards casket burial or towards something else.
Let's dig into the report first. And I wanted to see if there was anything particularly that stood out at CANA, but let's run through some of the highlights. Now, I spoke with you, I feel like last year. Was it a different report I spoke to you about?
Yes. So we're trying to do this now on an annual basis. So you and I talked about the first iteration, which we surveyed folks in 2024. Yeah, that was the first year that we did it. And we only surveyed 500 people. It's sort of a test run. And then, so in 2025, with CANA's support, I expanded it to 1,500 people, which was great because then I was able to not only get a representative group that matches the 2020 US Census in terms of age, gender, race, those kinds of things, but I was also able to get representation from the 4 census regions. So it gives some clues into what's going on in different regions of the country.
Were there any shocking changes from year to year, or was it pretty close? Because I feel like that's what, when I was looking at it, I'm like, I'm not shocked by any of it.
I think the biggest difference year over year, and I don't know if this is because we had a smaller sample size the first year or if this is a 1-year blip. I should say the plan is to continue doing this on an annual basis so that we can track trends over time, because anytime you just do a survey, that's just a snapshot, right? And can be influenced by any number of variables. So let me just remind people how the survey was set up.
Please.
we defined 6 different methods of disposition for people because we assumed that people taking the survey did not have a baseline of knowledge. So we tried to make the definitions be consistent with one another, right? So it's not favoring
Right.
or trying to push people towards one or the other. Try to be as nonpartisan as possible. And then they were presented to them in a random order so that we wouldn't have ordering bias, right?
Mm-hmm.
So everybody gets the same choice first, et cetera. So we asked them, have you ever heard of this method of disposition? Would you consider this method of disposition? And then we ask them to rank order their preferences at the end. And then we can slice and dice the first rank preferences and second rank preferences and all of that in various ways to try to derive some kind of interesting insights from them. So I think the biggest surprise for me was Gen Z, 52% of them said that casket burial is their first choice. And only 17% said cremation is their first choice. And of course, the cremation rate in 2024 was 62%. So that's a pretty huge change. And that was a significant shift from the 2024 report, where Gen Z maybe was a little bit more friendly towards burial, but certainly not majority.
Well, because that's what stood out to me. I remember the headlines last year. I didn't write one of them, but there were lots of headlines that were like, Gen Z wants caskets back. I thought it was interesting. I also thought, that was something that people picked up on.
But I think the number was even more out there in 2025. And so again, the question is this a blip? Is this a thing? And if this is a thing, what is going on with Gen Z?
That's really what I wanted to talk about. In your report, you called it the Cremation Paradox, and it says only 33% would choose cremation, but
Well,
go ahead, please.
no, I should say 33% said cremation was their first choice.
I see.
Overall. Yeah.
I see. And I'm wondering, I'm thinking of my father's death, and my father's funeral, I believe, was $11,000 or $12,000. He was embalmed, he was in a rental casket, he was cremated. And my my youngest brother, I'm 20 years older than him, said he would have died if he found out we dropped $12,000 on that.
Right.
And I think that's not the first time you've heard that story, right? That is the kind of like, well, I'm definitely, not having an embalming now, and I'm definitely not having a funeral like my father's now. I'm gonna just put me in a pine box, all of those
Right.
things. And I'm wondering if the distance between where you are and where you're going to be when you're dead has anything to do with the, I want a state funeral when I'm 20.
Right.
I want everyone to line up around the graveyard. I want there to be a long line following the casket. But as I get closer, I'm not certain that that's what I want. And that's what I think is the most interesting thing. I would love to see just over the next 10 years how this survey evolves. I think it'll be really a good explanation of where we are in relation to death.
I think that that's a big part of it, is that people in Gen Z who are, for the purposes of our survey, 18 to 28-year-olds, because we didn't survey anybody less than 18 years old. So who knows what they want? We'll find out in a couple years when they get old enough to take the survey. But those folks are far away from thinking about this in realistic terms, right? And so but it was really interesting to sort of look at the different generational cohorts, because you do see sort of gradual changes as you go from Gen Z to millennials to Gen X to baby boomers. Baby boomers are probably the most realistic about what their choices are and have probably thought about it more than anybody else. But still, they're not preferencing cremation to the extent that the actual cremation rate is. I think baby boomers, 41% of them said cremation is their first choice. And again, the cremation rate is 62%. So there's still a gap, right? So we can go back to the Gen Z in a second, because I think there's a lot to unpack there. But let me just say one other thing, if I may, about the cremation paradox. What I really think is the paradox is if you add cremations, people who said cremation's their first choice and people who said cremation's their second choice, you add those two numbers together, you get the actual cremation rate.
Oh, wow.
But if you take the overall casket burial is my first choice, you get the casket burial rate. So in other words, people who said overall, I want casket burial, they're getting it.
Mm.
But you have to add first and second choice together to get cremation rate, which says to me there are a bunch of folks who want something else, but then because of cost or logistics, right, or some other restriction, aren't able to get their first choice. And so they see cremation as a solid second choice, or something to settle for. Like it's the default now, right? If I can't get what I really want, I'm going to default to cremation as opposed to burial.
That is absolutely fascinating. And with the rise of these other alternative methods of disposition, the news, by the way, isn't that the Greenwood Cemetery added cremation. The news is that someone is selling, added natural
NOR.
organic reduction. Yeah. The news is that someone is selling an NOR Bach,
Right.
which is really, there's only one other person that I know of that's doing that, and he's doing them like one at a time. But there's a
Seth
company.
in Colorado. Yeah.
But there is a company now that is the business. We are in the business just as in the 1800s, the furniture makers got into the business of making caskets. There's a company now that's got into the business of making these vessels. And that is really, I think, again, another decade, but something that is going to be a huge change for people.
Well, yeah, we'll see how that all works. I mean, Greenwood is in a particularly
Yeah.
good position to make it work. I think it's Seth out of Colorado is selling units to funeral directors in states where NOR has been legalized, and then this German company is who sold the units to Greenwood.
Right.
And I think there's some minimum number of units that you have to buy because there's a computer system that runs the whole thing and all that. But still, it's not like, you put a crematory retort in your funeral home. I mean, NOR takes 60 to 90 days, right? I mean,
Right.
so we'll see how it all works out.
You're imagining as I was, like these huge, futuristic walls of bodies sliding in and out.
Yeah, I think I'm not convinced it's cost effective for anybody to run a small number of these machines. I think the future NOR is going to be NOR facilities like they've done in Washington State,
Right.
expand those out. Because I just don't see, with how slow the process is, that it's cost effective to just run a couple. But, well, we'll see.
And now I want to talk about aquamation,
Sure.
and I want to tie it to cremation. So they just legalized it in Scotland, and because everyone's always nice and level-headed, they're calling it boil in the bag.
Yeah.
And then I think of when I first started this, and I was stupid enough to call them ashes, how angry people were.
Mm,
Now, cremated remains were ashes because that was something dirty that only the poor people did.
mm.
And I wonder if 30 years from now, we're going to be like, it's not boil in the bag, it's aquamation, and this is why. You know what I mean? It feels very similar, very, very reactive. And when presented with alkaline hydrolysis, what was kind of the take in your
Um, it's not super popular according to my survey. It was the first choice of 2%
Mm.
of respondents, compared to NOR or composting was the first choice of 6%. So, water cremation is available in twice as many states as NOR. It's or I'm sorry, I should say it's legalized in twice as many states. It's available in a lot more states than NOR is currently available in. And it's been around for a much longer period of time. And it was the first choice of a third of the people who said they wanted to try this new composting thing. So, I mean, it's interesting, right? I mean, definitely, I think the patterns of people's responses indicates that the folks who are interested in it see it as an alternative to cremation. In other words, I looked at like the combos of people's first and second choices,
Uh-huh.
right? And if your first choice was AH, or water cremation, your second choice was cremation. And for people who said their second choice was water cremation, their first choice was cremation, right? So, I mean, that people are seeing those two as alternatives to one another, those who are interested. But about 2/3 of respondents put it as they're in the bottom half of their choices. So it's kind of polarizing, I'd say.
Well, I interviewed I can't think of his name. There's a guy in North Carolina, Eric Besser, and he has both. He offers both,
Uh-huh.
as lots of people do, and he he used to outsource his cremation, and he made the alkaline hydrolysis the same price as the outsourced cremation, and he had like a 92% conversion rate when he said, okay, well, this is cremation is, I'm going to make up a number, $800, and aquamation is $800. We do aquamation here, we send you out for cremation, and that was all he had to say.
Right.
And I don't know if it was the aquamation or the we send you out part that had to do it. But increasingly, people are having to send families out for cremation, as there's also kind of this contraction around the country with
Mhm.
a couple of times recently, places have closed, and the law won't allow them to replace their crematoria.
Right.
And I'm wondering how reasonable that is. How sustainable it is to just continue to outlaw. I mean, because it's also a religious practice, right? It's not just for poor people who don't mind being dirty, it's
Right.
so crazy to me to see this happen in the news. Is there a way to can cremation be how do we clean up cremation without greenwashing it, I guess is the question.
You mean clean it up in terms of people's perceptions of it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, like I said, one of the things I did not ask people was the why, but I
Right.
think the why is really important. Why are you choosing particular things, right? And so sometimes we can get to the why by looking at the alignment of choices. So, for example, people identified as Roman Catholic, more than half of them in the survey said casket burial is their first choice. Okay, so
Yeah.
that leads me to probably reasonably conclude that being Catholic has something to do with choosing casket burial, right? And
Mhm.
and things like that. But people are complicated and motivations are complicated, and people choose cremation for a lot of different reasons. And I think cost, obviously, because it is less expensive than
Mhm.
pretty much anything else, or maybe on par with water cremation in some places. But the flexibility is a thing that folks report again and again in different kinds of surveys, is a reason that they choose cremation, because we don't have to have an immediate service.
Mm.
We can put it off. We can do a lot of different things with cremated remains, right? But that flexibility is also available if you choose water cremation or NOR.
Right.
And so it'll be interesting as we have new choices that are, I think, inarguably greener, right?
Mhm.
Composting and AH are just less environmentally impactful than cremation, how that additional variable kind of features into people's, thought processes.
And it's really, I don't wanna be too pejorative about it, but the easiest thing to do is to be cremated or buried, and everything
For sure.
else is very, very complicated. You have to live in the right place at the right time. You have to walk into the right funeral director
That's right.
the first time, and that's something that, as I think funeral homes struggle to find ways of revenue, I think that they're going to have to start to admit that there are other ways, and these other methods of disposition. When I speak with funeral directors associations, the heads of them are like, we don't care. Well, why can't it pass?
Mhm.
Why does Indiana still not have alkaline hydrolysis as an option if everybody is so for it?
'Cause you
You know,
can't sell a casket for alkaline hydroxide.
because you can't sell a casket for alkaline hydrolysis.
I say as a Hoosier,
It's really, I mean,
that is
it
absolutely the reason we didn't have it.
and it is just amazing to me.
Yeah.
And
You're surprised by naked protectionism? Come on,
it's
man.
it's really, really always a surprise to me, but I do wanna jump back to NOR for a second because it was just legalized in no, I'm sorry, it's on the docket, again in Ohio, and of course, so whenever it comes up on the docket, naturally, people start searching for green burial.
Mhm.
And that is a distinction that I know the green burial people aren't necessarily nuts about.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
but, but let's talk about green burial and how.
hard it is for some people to get around their head. They feel like if it's not cremation and it's not casket, then it's green burial.
So, green burial, according to my survey, remarkably popular.
Hmm.
And I think it is a little surprising to some folks. So, number one, remarkably popular, and number two, much less polarizing than some of the others. So, it was the first choice of almost 11%. It was the second choice of 22%. And then when you look at sort of the bottom half of choices, right, it was rejected less often than other methods. Like it was the last choice of only 7% of people,
Wow.
um, versus like casket burial was the last choice of 20% of people. They're like, do anything to me except put me in in a steel casket and put me in a vault. So, I mean, it's interesting to kind of look at both ends of the pole, right? In terms of is something an acceptable choice, but maybe not your first choice, or what? I will. So I think one of the possibilities for improvement in the way that I
Right.
ask questions is I think it is possible, and I talked to a couple folks at Cana Symposium about this particularly, is that the respondents, even though we did define the different methods for them, they don't really get what I'm talking about in the distinction between what I called casket burial and green burial. And so, for example, I looked at the number of people who put either casket burial first and green burial second, or green burial first and casket burial second. And that was 14% overall
Hmm.
of folks who did that. So they're just like, I would characterize those as the just put me in the ground
Right.
people, right? And I'm not going to be super concerned about the nuance between the two methods. But among Gen Z, it was 25% did either casket burial first, green second, or green first, casket second. So a quarter of people were saying, just bury me. And then we saw overall, right, that Gen Z was preferencing casket burial as number one by a significant amount. Are they not really getting the difference between the two, right?
Hmm.
Um, because then also when I ask everybody, would you consider embalming? Gen Z, I think it was only 43% of them would even consider embalming. So 52% said casket burial is their first choice, but only 43% would consider embalming. There's a disconnect there, right?
Right.
So I think that even as popular as green burial was in the survey, I think shadow, it's really more popular because I think people are signaling in their answers to other questions that they are actually interested in greener burial than what we would call sort of quote unquote traditional burial today, right? With embalming and the steel casket and all that.
To bring it back to my family, because I think it's typical-ish. My parents, they're baby boomers, all of these things.
Mm,
My mother would be perfectly happy not to be embalmed. I think that there's a vanity aspect to it.
yeah,
Without calling if I called my mother vain, she would kill me because she's not a vain person. But you know what I mean?
yeah,
A self-awareness. I don't want to not be the person who dresses me and puts on my makeup before everyone sees me for the last
right,
time. Let me put it that
right,
way, right?
right.
And however, that is I think, more in the cases of natural death. And I think where embalming is going to continue to be, it's not I feel like embalming is moving less from a choice and more to a necessity. I died far away. I died young and in an accident. Those are the places where embalming, I think, is going to remain strong. But as people are making their choices and it's like, I don't know, I like to tie my tie in a certain kind of way. These are the earrings I like to wear. Again, I just think of my mother and I think that if she could die after she dressed herself, I think she would be fine with that.
Yeah.
But the lack of control and the realization of the lack of control, I think, is what's wearing on people more than anything, including environmental concerns.
Well, so I also ask respondents, so I ask them two separate questions. I said, would you consider having an open casket viewing? And would you consider being embalmed? Less than 50% said they would consider being embalmed, but almost 60% said they would consider having an open casket viewing. So, which again strikes me as there's a disconnect between their understanding of what their real choices are, right?
Right. Not that anyone's going to be shocked about this, but this really kind of reveals an education gap.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if there's a good way to kind of attack that, to kind of resolve that.
Well, I mean, there is a lot of press about death care, as you know, since you
Mm.
pay attention to these things, but it all tends to focus on, I think anecdotally, malfeasance
Yes. No, absolutely. Try to find a good
or
story. Yeah.
right, or new methods of disposition. That's where all the press is, right?
Mhm.
And so then if you don't have news stories about something, what do you have? You have depictions in popular culture.
Right.
And those tend to be like if there's a death and a funeral in a TV show or a movie, it tends to be open casket viewing and then a casket burial, right? That's the sort of I mean, how often because what's the dramatic effect of
Right.
having
No.
cremation,
Yeah.
right? You want everybody together so that you can have whatever the dramatic confrontation is, et cetera, at the graveside. So I think all of that's interesting, right? Because there is a cultural conversation going on, but it's not really driven by the reality of what's occurring in arrangement conferences.
One of the things that I think may be useful as far as this education aspect is concerned, is I'm increasingly covering the death doula movement,
Yeah.
and they are and the death positivity movement, which does have a lot of a lot of younger people are
Yep.
involved in that, and I think they're doing a really good job. But also, and this is not a knock; it's just my observation. The death positivity movement is for green burial. They're for also the alternative dispositions, home funerals where they're popular. And I don't know how much of that is, again, not a knock, I swear. But I don't know how much of that comes across as education and how much of it comes across as more like propaganda. Propaganda is an
Mm,
awful word. I don't mean it that way.
yeah.
Um invested education, I guess, is
Yes.
a better
Yeah.
way to put it.
Right.
Um
Viewpoint. Formed by a viewpoint.
Right, right. I mean, I can't imagine a director saying, "Hey, yeah, let's get this set up," putting this person in a box and sliding them into this. It's not the right kind of evocative.
Right.
And I wonder if that's why cremation keeps coming in second, because it's not evocative enough.
Yeah, but it's a practical choice, right? I mean, so when you're faced with the reality of it, I mean, this is a conversation I have with, a lot of people, and I'm certainly not the first person to say it, that I think we need to normalize discussions about this because the way that you really get education and you get people on board and understanding what their choices are is that you just have normal everyday conversations about these topics. And we're such a death sort of avoidant and death ignorant culture, right?
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
and trying to turn that around is the key. And it's not entertainment's, job to educate us about our our,
Right, right.
our death care choices. So we certainly cannot rely upon them um, to do it. But I think the kind of conversation that we're having, we just need to have more of those conversations and they need to reach more people.
I will do my best. And I want to ask you your final thoughts on that, but I also do want to talk about your podcast for a moment. So,
Yeah.
do you have any final thoughts on the presentation, which, by the way, is linked in the show notes, and I'll also have a story out on it in addition to this podcast, and all of those things will be linked for people who are listening. But any final
Yeah.
thoughts on the report?
I appreciate the link, and yes, the whole report, with lots of charts and numbers and everything is on the Cana website, and so folks can go to the research tab of the Cana website and find it. And
Excellent.
hopefully we'll be able to repeat it on an annual basis and get more data.
And now I want to talk about your podcast, and I don't want to say it wrong. Death et Sec.
That's it, death, and that's Latin for "and which follows."
It is it is literally the only death care podcast
Oh,
I think is absolutely fantastic and
thank you.
sometimes completely outrageous. I skipped the Catholic one. I didn't bother. Um, but sometimes you don't need to be any more angry than you already are. But the prison one was the last one I listened to, and I have all sorts of notes on that. And I was just saying, yeah, but what about this? And then you'd get to it. And I'm like, yeah, but what about that? And then you'd get to it. It was just a joy to listen to. Tell me how you came up with it, and tell me like tell everyone. I'm sorry, I listened to it. Tell everyone else what it's like.
Sure. So, well, I started doing it a number of years ago because, as you know, I teach a course at Wake Forest on funeral and cemetery law. And I would have folks email me, like practicing lawyers or students at other law schools, and say, "Can I take your class?" And no, we're not really we're just not set up for that. It's
Right.
not, I mean, yeah, it's a class for the people at this law school. So I started thinking about, well, is there another way to take some of these conversations and topics that we're doing in class and really thinking about the law and how it intersects in all these different ways with death care, and sort of, bring it to folks out there in the world who might be interested. I started actually before COVID and then took a significant hiatus that have started back up again.
You're the only person who stopped podcasting during COVID?
Yeah. Well, we weren't having class in person anyway. Whatever. So yes. So it's back. Every episode is I'm interviewing a guest. So the last real chunk of episodes, and I think when we're all done, it'll be 18 episodes, were all projects of students in my funeral and cemetery law class in the fall 2025 semester.
Mhm.
And so instead of having them write a research paper, I had them pick a topic and either sort of become the expert in that topic, like the episode that you're talking about, with respect to the remains of incarcerated individuals. That's a student, Katie Kester's in my class, who's going to go into criminal defense work. And
Mm.
so that's the area of law that she's super interested in. So she found a way to relate that to death care. And so she looked into the laws and regulations that have to do with what happens when a person dies in the custody of the state. And how does that impact, where are the notification processes and all of that good stuff. And so I think it's really cool when the students were able to take what they're interested in sort of in their career path and relate it to death care. So I had them either then, they wrote up a packet, kind of like a research paper, and then I interviewed them based on that. Or if they're too shy to be interviewed, that's okay too. I let them go find a guest. And then I interviewed that person, but they sort of briefed me on it and read that person's work and all that. So, for example, a couple episodes ago, I had Professor Eric Seaman, who's at University of Buffalo, and he writes a lot about early Protestant thought in the United States with respect to death. And that's really important for the law because it was that worldview, those social norms that helped create the legal system that we still have today.
I wanted to ask you, I meant to look up her name and I didn't. The guest who was speaking on grief bots and things like that.
Oh, the AI. Uh-huh.
What a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant person.
Yeah.
Is she going to continue with that? Because that is a really
Manjot. I'm not sure. She's a second-year law student, so I'm not sure that she's figured out what she wants to do with her life yet. But yeah, she's very bright, and I thought that was a great.
She could be the go-to person on the planet for this because that's something that's not going to sneak up on us slowly.
Yeah.
And it was an amazing episode only because I think that I'm trying to get a woman to speak with me, and we just keep missing one another. It's not like I'm stalking her or anything. But she's a nurse. She's out west someplace,
Uh-huh.
which is what's hard to reach her for.
Yeah, right. Time zone.
And she teaches nursing school, and they have a chat bot that they use to practice telling people that they're going to die.
Mm,
And if AI has a use in death, I would love to see something like that moving more into like into the arrangement conference. Because what it is now is you just sit in the corner and listen for a while,
right.
and then you try it.
Right.
And I think things like that, they're dangerous. And don't get me started on, memorialization. But as far as for training purposes, I feel like they're very useful.
Yeah. Well, AI is really in its infancy, right? I mean, we're just trying to figure out. Um,
It's like fire is in its infancy.
right.
It
Right.
really
I mean,
is.
like, we'll figure out how can this be used for good and what should the safety rules be and all that.
Well, and that's all I wanted to at least talk to people a little bit about the show because it is fantastic.
Well, I
And
really appreciate that. Thank you.
I love to hear smart people talking about interesting things. It's really just the best way to spend your time, or among the best way.
Well, and it's been fun to have the students coming up with topics because some of them came up with topics that I would not have come up with. Cremation Fireworks was one of my favorite
Yeah,
episodes. I don't know if you heard that one.
yeah, it was fun. It's just that the AI one just blew my mind. It was just
Yeah.
just for someone to know so much, for someone I mean, I don't want to have to admit that I'm old, but for someone so young to be so crazy bright about something brand new, it was just
Yeah.
really, really impressive.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that does it for me. Is there anything else? Is there something I should have asked and didn't?
No, I think we covered it.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for having me.
See, I thought that would be a great conversation, and I would love to get your take on it if you would love to share your take on it. And you can do that by just shooting me an email. I'm by TonyRusso@gmail.com, or you can respond right here in the show notes where there's an opportunity to comment and to share. You can do all those things, and I will appreciate it if you do any of those things. I am always interested in topic suggestions. We've got some really good shows already in the can for the next couple weeks, but if you have something that you think you'd like to see covered, I would love to cover it. So please don't hesitate in reaching out to let me know about what you'd like to hear. Finally, if you have not yet subscribed to On Death Care, the newsletter, please go to ondeathcare.com and click subscribe. That way you get everything when it comes out. It is free to subscribe. We do have paid levels that have extra things, but all of the regular reporting that I've been doing for the last 3 or so years is going to be available to anyone who's interested to read it. And I hope that you're one of the people who are interested in reading it. That will do me for this episode, but if you're new, remember that on Friday I have my weekly rundown news show where I talk about some of the top news stories involving death care for the week. So subscribe to this feed as well, and you'll get at least all of the podcasts whenever they come out. I'm going to be doing between 1 and 3 a week until I fall down. And as long as I don't fall down, I will check in with you Friday.